Leela Ponappa, should we take Mr. Tangen's views at face value? He's saying these are pious, it's pious propaganda that India is pushing, when, or even suggesting that that China in some way is backing Pakistan. I mean, isn't the evidence on the ground strong enough to believe that China is no friend of India when it comes to an India-Pakistan conflict?
I think words and adjectives and descriptors like pious and so on don't really belong in a serious conversation like this. And I think we should stay with the facts. Rajdeep, you mentioned how China has regularly opposed the listing of known terrorists in the UN's sanction committee because Pakistan did not want those names included. How would China explain that? Is that being pious in terms of wanting peace? I don't think so. And I would also like to go back to, if I may, other than China, go to some of the earlier points with regard to the fact that an attack on a terrorist encampment is equated with a military operation. Now, because of the nature of the Pakistan state, where for a variety of their own reasons, it is the army that has been the dominant player ever since Pakistan was created, the equation of terrorism with the army really has come full circle. And this was the third point that was enunciated by the Prime Minister. You see, within the United Nations, when they look at terrorism, the assumption is that these are non-state actors. But we know from our experience with Mumbai and other instances...
Why, but at the point that Sandeep also made, why aren't more countries in the world speaking out, saying India has the right to self-defense, that these distinctions between state and non-state actors cannot exist in the 21st century, that if you spawn terror, you will have to face some punitive action? Why didn't more countries in the world speak out more strongly for India?
I believe that at some of the closed-door meetings of the UN Security Council, even of the OIC, people did speak up, because I think Indian diplomacy was extremely active in getting the facts across to all our interlocutors. Why countries don't do it? Well, why don't we start with the United States, since we are yet to discuss them? I can tell you that after 2008, after the Mumbai attacks, several countries sent envoys to India. Yes, they all made pious statements about, regret for what happened and so on and so forth. But the oft-stated concern was there should not be a war or a conflict or militarization between India and Pakistan after the gruesome attack on Mumbai. Ditto over here, lots of concern, lots of counsel about de-escalation and so on. And frankly, India's clarity with regard to handling these matters bilaterally has been well established. It was incorporated into the Simla Agreement. We have friends who come and talk to us. I'm sure they talk to Pakistan as well, those who consider themselves friends of Pakistan. And in this particular case, some kind of counsel seems to have been given by which Pakistan rang up and asked for a ceasefire. But India is very clear that these are matters that need to be handled bilaterally. The international community is most welcome to take a public stand in terms of countering terrorism, of not letting a terrorist have any place to hide, of not allowing financing, training, weaponization, trafficking, and what have you. These are all there for the international community to do. And diplomacy has worked to a greater extent this time than earlier.
No, but the point I want to make, and this is, let's come to the US role, because if India and Pakistan, or India certainly says we need to solve this bilaterally. That's been our position. But if we don't even have a dialogue with Pakistan at the moment, then you will have other countries intervening. And that comes to my next question. Can Donald Trump be the one who does an India-Pakistan deal? He's talking about it, talks about it virtually on a daily basis. Mr. Bandawala, how do you make out what Trump is doing? Because there in the United States, is it seen that the Trump administration I thought wanted to look increasingly inwards. Now we've got Donald Trump almost every day having something to say about India and Pakistan, more in the context of trade, but almost taking credit as someone who can do a deal with the two countries.
Yeah, no, I think there's this juxtaposition where on the one hand, Trump and people in his administration, his vice president most prominently, will speak regularly about the United States' need to not fix the problems of the world and to look to itself. And, Trump's speech in Saudi Arabia just the other day was along the same lines, an attack on nation building, maybe not diplomacy, but on nation building in the Middle East. And as I said, the vice president, in regard to both Ukraine when he was, earlier in his political career, and in regard to the India-Pakistan conflict, publicly espoused a kind of hands-off position. And that changed very quickly. And the president himself obviously got involved. To what degree he did that, I think there's some, as someone alluded to earlier, there's some question. And I think India rebuffed the idea that trade had anything to do with it, that he was dangling trade as an inducement to peace in the conflict. But I think it's clear one of the things he values most as a descriptor and as a way to be identified is as a peacemaker. He says that to both domestic and international audiences regularly. And so I think that he would love to broker some kind of agreement between India and Pakistan, even if it's something that we might all kind of look a stance at and might think is a pretty minor, confidence building measure or something, but something he can spin out and market as a much bigger agreement than it is. I think is very much something he'd like to pull off. How durable or meaningful that might be is very much another question.
Derek Grossman, do you believe that Trump is serious when he says he wants to do a deal, or is this Trump just positioning himself ahead of doing trade deals with both India and Pakistan?
Well, no, I think he's very serious about the need for negotiations between different countries. I mean, remember that he is he prides himself on the art of the deal, right? And when he sees the potential for a deal, he usually goes for it. I think in this case, the stakes were extraordinarily high, and I'm glad that he was able, and in his administration, were able to help broker a deal. Now, that said, I mean, your point about trade, we just had National Liberation Day on April 2nd, and so we imposed tariffs on virtually every country, and then we put a 90-day pause on those tariffs. I do think that there is a factor here that cannot be ignored, which is he wants better trade deals with both India and Pakistan. So that's why he's brought up that issue recently. That said, from an Indian and probably from a Pakistani perspective as well, trade really has nothing to do with settling the Kashmir dispute. And I think that's why New Delhi and, again, probably Islamabad are a bit frustrated by that, right? Because if, from their perspective, I'm sure they want the U.S. to be involved if it's actually going to lead to peace. India wants to settle it bilaterally with Pakistan. I get that. But India's also held its tongue when it comes to Trump's talk about Kashmir. They don't want to spoil their relationship with the Trump administration so early on in his tenure, right? So they're kind of holding their tongue, but they are very upset about him putting Pakistan on par with India in this dispute. But that said, if the U.S. can contribute to peace in the region somehow, right, I think that will be a welcome development. But linking